Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle, joined by George Szamuely. He's a co-founder of this channel. George, going through the cable stations, of course, everyone is talking about this impasse that I think that's a neutral term there, impasse that has been reached in coming to a conclusion of the presidential election. Of course, on the liberal cable station, have this is done and dusted. Get over it. How dare you contest this? Was a completely free and efficient election. You know the mantra here. And anyone that brings up anything questionable about the election is deemed a conspiracy theorist by people that perpetuated a conspiracy theory for 3.5 years on the public here. And then, of course, we can look at Fox, where I think that Tucker Carlson is taking a very reasonable position. He's saying, and I think he basically represents the position that you and I have, if the people report irregularities, they should be looked into. There is a timeline that is legally defined. There is time still to look into these allegations and other irregularities. I think that's a perfectly calm position. Of course, that's not what the left wants here. And then we have people like Sidney Powell coming out and making some pretty extraordinary claims here. Now, I understand that on the one hand, some of the claims that she's making are being put into lawsuits, and affidavits haven't been served up in all of this. I can see why there's kind of a pullback from showing evidence. But when you're making these kind of allegations on this scale, I think you've got to give everybody something to chew on here. So this is where we stand. Some polls that I've taken a look at today look at registered Republicans, over 50% believe the election has been stolen. Even a higher percentage in the low 60s believe that it was rigged. This does not bode well. And it's all on the back of how President Trump was treated during the transition and during his presidency. And this is what the left is up to. It's not about this specific election event or events. This is backed up by a deep-seated feeling that the establishment was against them. And there's ample evidence of that here. But when we get to this nexus point here, it puts the legitimacy of this election at stake here. And this is something that isn't going to work out well for anyone if it continues here. Go ahead, George.
It definitely won't. And there is a difference, though, between what Trump is doing now and what the Obama people were doing in 2016. I mean, Trump is at the moment using the legal and constitutional tools at his disposal to challenge the result. Now, he may not succeed. The courts may well reject his lawsuits. His appeal to the electors may not work. But nonetheless, what he's doing, he's entitled to do. There are obvious questions raised about what happened. And this was a unique election. There'd never been anything voting by mail-in ballots on this scale, never before. There are clearly security issues. There were issues that people didn't check signatures and so on. And I think that should be looked into. Contrast that with what Obama did in 2016. Within days of the election, he announced that he's going to order an inquiry into Russian interference in the election. So he already was prejudging the findings of the inquiry. And then, of course, Brennan duly came out. Yes, Russia interfered in the election in order to secure a victory for Donald Trump.
But no proof was presented.
No proof, none. No proof whatsoever. They published that intelligence community assessment, which itself was a fraud because it wasn't an intelligence community assessment. It was just simply Brennan and a handful of people who already thought like Brennan. And that, of course, poisoned everything right from the start, from the Trump administration. And again, this brings out the Sidney Powell thing and Michael Flynn. Remember, by launching their campaign against Russia, expelling the diplomats, imposing sanctions, closing down diplomatic compounds, they deliberately did this in order to sabotage Trump's stated policy to improve relations with Russia, because then essentially Trump was in a no-win situation. Because, essentially, if the Russians respond by symmetrically, as the Russians usually do, by expelling Russian diplomats, then it's by American diplomats, then of course it's very hard to come back from that. Or, what happened, which is that the Russians refused to respond in the hope of a goodwill gesture towards the incoming Trump team, then the Obama people used that to say, look, we were right. There was a conspiracy between Trump and Russia. So there is a contrast between a slimy, deceitful, evidence-free, non-legal method that people use with what his legal remedies. And I think that's why, as we were talking just before, there is something very disgusting about the law firms that have been pressured to abandon the Trump campaign. I mean, law firms are supposed to represent everybody. Everybody is entitled to legal counsel.
Even OJ.
Exactly, the worst person in the world, like OJ Simpson, child killers, multiple rapists, you name it, the worst people in the world. They're all entitled to legal representation, and that legal representation means they have to do the best on behalf of your client, no matter how much you disapprove. But the idea that Jones Day, one of the biggest law firms in the world, should be bullied into abandoning its client, and who is the president of the United States, I just find that so disgusting. It's hard to put it into words.
It's for me, it's very interesting. Is what explains the left's inability to say, "Hey, okay, a complaint, an affidavit has been presented to a court. All right, absolutely, we have the procedure should move forward." But it's because their ideology is so hegemonic. Because there is no room for compromise, because compromise means that you are devaluing your moral stature. I mean, you can't engage these people in this conversation because it would legitimize it. You see, this is what politics is supposed to be all about, is to legitimize a difference and adjudicate it here. But this hegemonic ideology that they have, they cannot for 1 second, for one heartbeat, consider that their view of the world and how it should work can be questioned. You can't question it. And this is what I find really frustrating, because this is the end of politics, because this is the administration of the body politic. They want to administer everything. Okay, there's no debate about it, and it's a very tragic place, because again, there's 70 million plus people that don't agree with that approach whatsoever, and so it's in our lifetime, it's never been such a blood sport. I mean, winning means total annihilation of your opponent. That's something new for us, at least for me.
I think that's right. And it's yet another example of what American foreign policy coming home to roost.
Exactly.
Because that's exactly what Americans have been doing when they demonized a political leader. And it wasn't enough that they would illegally topple that leader, illegally wage war against that leader. No, they had to bring that leader in chains to some phony baloney trial court that they set up in order that he can then be tried and imprisoned. If you happen to be living in Europe, then that's okay. You'll be imprisoned for life. Or if you're not living in Europe, then you get executed, a la Saddam Hussein. So that was it. So when back in the 90s, when the United States targeted Yugoslavia, it wasn't sufficient to bomb them, to sanction them, to make life miserable, to take away their land. They had to actually get Milosevic. They had to put him on trial in The Hague so that he can then be put on trial, convicted, and sent to prison for the rest of his life. And that's the mentality that now pervades here.
In a slightly different way, but to the same point here, is the killing of bin Laden. I mean, they were in his compound. Apparently he was unarmed. Why didn't you take him prisoner and put him on trial? No, they don't want a trial. They see, in that sense, I'm agreeing with your point here, but it's so totalistic, okay? And you're right, totally destroying the credibility of taking away even the humanity. And in the case of bin Laden, they didn't want to have any uncomfortable questions asked, okay? Also with Gaddafi, I'm willing to say all of these people have their huge faults and maybe even committed crimes. I'm more than willing to say that, okay? But at the same time, if you're doing it in the name of the rule of law, why don't you apply the rule of law? You see what I mean? Because this ideology is so totalistic that it can't abhor having the other. The other can exist. It's kind of like kind of like a Soviet ideology. I mean, there's only one course of history, and you cannot deviate from it. And it in my mind, it totally failed because of its totalistic approach here. And now I see the left doing exactly
right, and that's why. When they did bring Milosevic to trial, but the trial they couldn't control, because however much they tried to control it, bits of the truth came out. And when bits of the truth come out, and although the media refused to cover it other than the usual, government-sanctioned reports, the media report, Milosevic showed up what the NATO policy, what United States policy had been. And so that's why they didn't want to put bin Laden on trial. However much they would control all the different bits and pieces of it, restrict the evidence that he can bring in, restrict the number of witnesses he can use, keep the public out. However much you control that, bits of the truth are going to come out. And so they didn't want to take that risk in bin Laden.
And that's why Julian Assange is not being given a free and fair trial. Okay, they keep him in that glass box. Okay, because they don't want the other side or a side to come out, because the side that they totally believe in is that it is unpalatable. There could be an other side, and that really short circuits any kind of negotiation of resolving differences. It's truly extraordinary. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and I said this very early on after the election of Trump, is that the regime change playbook is being played in the United States right now. Okay, and again, what you and I reflected upon so many times about, like, look at what's happened in Ukraine 2004 all the way up to 2014, is that contest the election. But the interesting thing is, flip this policy where you cannot contest it. Okay, it's really interesting how they maneuver this playbook.
Right. No, exactly right, and that's why. And it was always predictable that if Trump would lose the election, the line would be the very next day: shut up and swallow this. Trump lost. Election is over. That's it. Get out. And in other words, exactly the opposite of what you've been doing for 4 years. And this is the whole point of that. When Obama launched that thing, that phony, absolute rubbish about Russian interference, he knew that this is what's going to happen. That for the next 4 years, his Democratic allies and the media would seek in every way possible to delegitimize the Trump presidency. Oh, well, of course, he's not a legitimate president. He was hoisted into power by Vladimir Putin. And if you do this, and the poll that you just cited with the Republicans saying, okay, well, 55% or whatever believe that this election was stolen, but that, they had the polls during the Trump years of asking Democrats, do you think that the Russians stole this election? It was exactly the same. You had about 60% of Democrat voters said, yeah, Russia stole the election. So this is exactly kind of the symmetry of that people just simply refuse to accept the legitimacy of such election.
I don't know if you heard, but the Lincoln Project has turned a page. It basically now, and I'm going to use my words here, is that they essentially are now pushing the re-education of the Trump voter, because there's something wrong with the Trump voter. See, when you work from that supposition, that means you do not believe in politics. You don't believe in freedom of speech. You don't believe in choice, and that is really terrifying. I've come across that mentality, and it horrifying, because you really feel that that person cannot tolerate an argument, and that's what makes progress possible. Arguments, okay? Make your best case, okay? But the case has already been made. It's put into stone, and if you can't follow the gospel, then you have no place in our church. Okay, I keep using these religious metaphors because I think it's really apt. Okay, because you cannot contest the scripture. Okay, and thinking speaking of scripture, how is it all these Democrats on cable TV say exactly the same words every single news cycle? I mean, they really must be put on a list and repeated. You know, the most undemocratic event in history, the most undemocratic history in history, and it just one after another after another. You know, it's very much like, you know, during the Soviet era, you know, when a Czech chemist would be talking about certain elements in the universe and say, but as Vladimir Lenin said once, you know, they always have to genuflect. They have to genuflect to the power, okay? And I remember seeing that, and I always found it kind of funny because, you know, it was so ideologically constrained. But this is the same thing we see in the left in the U.S., in the West in general.
Yes, that's right. And what we've witnessed is the intellectual corruption. I mean, if you look at something like the New York Times, I mean, it was never a great newspaper. I mean, it always thought that it was a great newspaper, but it never was. I mean, it was a boring newspaper. But now it's just a rag. You know, I looked at the headline in today's edition, and it has exactly what you just said. That very headline, you're saying, this is unprecedented. Trump's challenge of this election result is unprecedented. And of course, you know, it's absolutely ridiculous because, of course, it is precedented, precedented many times.
And that's why we have all of these laws. That's why we have all of these timelines. Because if something is contested, there is a fallback position.
Right. Yeah, that's it. And it's contested. But that's it. So you just repeat and everybody just falls into line. But then when the New York Times, which ran that long article the other day about asking this question, is rule of law possible in America without a trial and punishment of Donald Trump? Can you imagine sort of writing a headline? This is, I don't know, there's a long magazine article, 20,000 words or whatever, unreadable. So in other words, you know, it's so question-begging, ridiculous. But it is this mentality, precisely when you had America demonizes its enemies and say, is international law possible without the execution of Saddam Hussein? Is international law possible without the trial and imprisonment of Slobodan Milosevic? That's the mentality. It's the sort of re-education that these people must be shown the evil of their ways, and they realize the wisdom of our way. I mean,
There was an article, I think it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, some stupid talking head said this is like post-Nazi Germany, okay, where we have to re-educate these people. I'm sorry, I can't remember the citation right now, but I mean, there are people that believe that. I mean, and there are people that are in the orbit of the Lincoln Project also feel that way because it's a good grift. I mean, if we could re-educate 70 million people, there's got to be some money in that somewhere. Okay?
Absolutely. A lot of money, a lot of money. Because, and if you look at these international courts, like the Tribunal for Yugoslavia, a lot of very prosperous and ambitious lawyers all wanted to work at this tribunal, the ICTY, but they all wanted to work for the prosecutors. None of them ever wanted to work for the defense. So that's their mentality. Hey, I want to prosecute. I want to show how evil all these people are. And that's a mentality. So, in other words, he's a lawyer who would be saying, well, I'm not really very happy about putting former presidents on trial on vague charges. You would think that's what a lawyer would immediately think. Well, I don't like vagueness in the law, and I don't like persecuting political opponents. Most of the lawyers say, yes, let's put Trump on trial.
We're not supposed to be about victor's vengeance, okay? We're not supposed to be about that, okay? So, well, George, this is where we stand right now. It seems like more and more allegations are being cited here. What's happening, and I think we have to keep a laser focus on it, as you love to say at the end, is that, as I said in a previous video, a perception that is repeated enough times through a length of period, a certain duration, it becomes reality in the minds of people here, and actual events and decisions can be pushed to the wayside here. And I implore the Biden orbit, I implore the DNC. I won't implore CNN and MSNBC because they just have lost it. But get actively involved in resolving these issues, and then let the votes stand where they are. And unfortunately, we had to go through this, and this was perfectly predictable. But they better figure out this ballot situation, because too many people are going to say, "What's the point? What's the point in going through this exercise here?" And that is probably the worst thing that can happen. And particularly in a country like the United States, that I know very well since I was born and brought up there, is that when people lose their faith in an institution, you don't believe anything you're being told. And this separation, this division is only going to get worse. And I don't want to contemplate how that could end, but it's not going to end in a good place, obviously.
No, that's absolutely right. If people don't think that their vote counts for anything, then they resort to other means.
Yes.
And therefore it's an inevitability. If they think an election was rigged, the person they voted for was robbed of the office that he was elected to, people will then just essentially resort to violence or some other means. That's what happened in Ukraine. It wasn't just that these two elections were stolen. Then the people said, why should we go on? Why should we continue to live in Ukraine when the person we vote for and the one who's elected then is simply robbed at some point of the office that he's been voted into? And so we want out. And Ukraine can't be put back together again, and that fate could yet be awaiting the United States.
What all this could do, we're going to keep a laser focus on it, but one outcome is it's going to turn Donald J. Trump into the greatest American martyr in the country's history. And for someone that has been demonized, which I think excessively, there's certainly room for criticism, but this kind of demonization, this is what it's all brought us to, okay? And it's only one side that brought this here, and I don't care what anybody says. They created Russiagate, they created the mistrust, they created conspiracy theories. Now you live with it, okay? This is your making. You made this scenario, okay? And you have to live through it like the rest of us. Okay, George, thank you for spending your Saturday evening with me. If you like the Gaggle, then please like, share, and subscribe. And to quote George again, we're going to keep a laser focus on this. See you soon.